Welcome, tired traveler of time, tonight. You'll walk a path worn smooth by centuries of confusion, where empires argued over patches of soil so many times that the ground itself stopped caring. A place once drawn and redrawn on 100 maps, until even the people who lived there gave up remembering which name was official. You are entering a quiet land with no anthem, no winner, and no need for labels anymore. Just a soft, steady breath of life continuing without flags or fences. Let your mind become like that land, now wide open and undisturbed by the noise of borders. The world will shrink to silence as we drift into forgotten territory, and all you'll need to bring with you is stillness. Asterisk, you arrive at dusk. The light stretches low and soft across the hills, turning stone to amber and grass to gold. The wind is slow, hairless, like weather, more like a long-held breath being gently released. You stand before a wall that once meant everything. Not a simple wall, but a curtain of stone that wrapped itself around a city, a people, a way of living, thick and towering even now. But something's changed. It doesn't resist anymore. The grass climbs where soldiers once paced. Ivy traces, old arrow slits like fingers running along faded scars. The wall still stands, but it no longer holds. This is what's left of Arni, the city of 1001 churches. A capital once so fortified, so endlessly contested, that it became known as the place where empires came to test their fate. Armenians, Byzantines, Seljuks, Mongols, earthquakes, blizzards, siege after siege. Yet for over 7 centuries, Aeneas, walls stood firm against it, all stone on stone, will on will. And then, one day, no one came to challenge it anymore. The armies stopped arriving. The fires stopped burning. Even the merchants grew quiet. There was no single battle, no famous collapse. The war drums simply fell silent, and the wall, confused but patient, stayed upright waiting for a war that never returned. You pass through what's left of the gate. Its arch sags gently, not from failure, but fatigue. Inside, the city lies open and breathing. The streets are wide but not empty. They're filled with quiet things, wildflowers, soft soil, shadows from clouds that drift without aim. A donkey brays in the distance. Somewhere a bee hums. The structures still stand, some whole, some in reverent decay. Cathedral domes and caravanserai walls rise like questions no longer in need of answers. You walk slowly along a path once known to guards, priests, traders. The stones beneath your feet are smoothed by centuries of footsteps, then softened again by rain. A stone church leans slightly, held in place by its own insistence. Inside, the walls are covered in carvings, some still sharp, others worn to nib. You trace one with your finger, a cross, or maybe a constellation. Symbols always stretch into silence if left long enough. You find a bench, or maybe a fallen altar, and sit. The city doesn't feel abandoned. It feels like someone drew a blanket over it, gently, and said, "Rest now." The kind of rest that follows great effort, not failure, not defeat, just the deep exhale of something that gave everything it had. Arni didn't collapse. It stopped trying. It's hard to know what the last years were like. Did the people leave one by one, or all at once? Was there an official proclamation, or just a growing silence no one wanted to name? Maybe they stayed long after the glory faded, just out of habit, or love, or stubbornness. You picture someone sweeping the steps of a church, even after the congregation disappeared. Someone lighting a lamp even when no one else was watching. The kingdom it once ruled is gone. Its flags, its coins, its kings, all folded back into the dirt. But the wall remains unarmed, unguarded, unbothered. You lie back against the grass now growing thick at the base of the wall. It doesn't feel like ruin, it feels like acceptance. Like when a room is finally quiet enough to hear yourself breathe. The sky above is the color of old parchment. A star appears, then another. Let the gates stay open. Let the city keep dreaming. Let the wall forget what it was built to fear. You do not need to fight tonight. You are already within the arms of something that stopped fighting long ago. Sleep now, under arches that outlived ambition. Sleep where stones surrendered slowly and grass wrote the final chapter. Sleep in the hush of a kingdom that learned how to rest. Asterisk, the sand moves like breath here, not in gusts, but in long, slow exhales. The dunes roll softly toward the horizon, and everything feels like it's still in motion, even when it isn't. Beneath your feet, the ground crunches faintly, a mix of crushed stone, sun-dried salt, and something else. Iron thinned by centuries, powdered into the bones of the earth. You walk not on ruins, but on the shadows of roots, migration, paths, warpaths, supply lines, long erased. The map that once defined this place is gone, too fragile to survive the wind. But if you close your eyes and listen, you might still hear it. The quiet rhythm of a marching army, long after the boots have vanished. This is the story of the Zanari riders, a loose confederation of desert warriors who once carved their path through what is now the southern rim of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. They weren't an empire. They didn't build cities or palaces. They didn't record their kings or write down their victories. But they fought constantly, gracefully, endlessly, for honor, for water, for land, and sometimes for nothing at all. Their wars weren't marked by great clashes, but by movement. Riders wheeled across the sands in spirals, chasing rumors of rival camps, always hunting, always circling. They grew up on the move, slept under stars, and drank from wells that disappeared as quickly as they were found. To live was to fight, and to fight was to ride. But then something shifted, not all at once. No great battle, no divine sign, just ... fewer targets, fewer reasons. Some say the sands expanded, cutting them off from the oases they once depended on. Others whisper of trade routes drying up, or alliances forgotten. But most agree. The Zanari simply kept riding, even after there was nothing left to chase. You sit on a low rise of sand now, where a few scattered stones form a near circle. This was once a watch point, or a fire ring, or maybe just a place to rest. You reach down and lift something from the sand, a shard of metal, dull and thin as a dried leaf. It may have once been a blade, or part of a stirrup. But now it's just part of the earth. You imagine them riding through this same space, cloaks pulled tight, faces half wrapped against the wind, eyes scanning the horizon. They weren't looking for glory, just for the next reason, but none came. So they kept going, in loops, in spirals, across wind-swept nothing. Horses thinned, camps grew quieter, songs were hummed but no longer shared. At some point, their weapons grew too brittle, their camels too few. The sons of warriors were born into stillness instead of movement. One tribe settled near a spring and didn't leave. Another laid down their arms and started planting date palms. No one told them to stop. They just didn't start again. Now, when the wind dies, the silence here is deep, not empty, just rested. The kind of silence that comes after someone has finally allowed themselves to stop walking in circles. You lie back in the sand, your body heavy, your breath slow. Overhead, the stars begin to appear, the same ones those riders once used to navigate. But they don't guide you anywhere tonight. They just keep you company. Let the wheels stop turning. Let the desert remember the pattern. Let the dust hold the names you never needed to know. You do not need a direction tonight. You are already within the stillness that follows motion. Sleep. Now, where footsteps once circled like echoes. Sleep where swords became sand and no one needed to win. Sleep in the calm left behind by an army that forgot it was chasing anything at all. The land here doesn't rise sharply. It rolls, like a body exhaling, like a memory smoothing itself out. The hills are green, soft, and veined with cold stone walls that lead nowhere in particular. Sheep drift along the ridgelines, heather blooms quietly in patches, and the wind, always the wind, carries something softer than sound. Not words, not warnings, just the weightless echo of things once shouted, now long released. This is the country of forgotten clans, those who carved their identities not in flags or buildings, but in family lines and grudges. Here, high in the wet shoulders of the North, names meant everything. You were born into a name, bled for it, died for it. Generations would rise and fall fighting over glens and ridges, over old insults remembered more clearly than seasons. The war was personal here. It didn't need kings. It didn't need borders. It just needed memory. And memory, for a time, was enough. You were taught who you were by being taught who you were against. But memory wears out. Even in the hills, you walk a narrow path between two slopes. On your left, an ancient stone rests at a slant. Maybe a grave marker, maybe a boundary line. No inscription remains. On your right, a stream whispers across rocks, curling around moss and lichen like it has always known the way. You stop for a moment and listen. There's nothing urgent in this place. No footsteps behind you. No banners ahead. The clans are gone now. Not vanished, just ... softened. Their names echo in old church records, in crumbling watchtowers, in songs, sung out of habit more than meaning. Somewhere, a family might still carry the surname, but the feud is missing. The fire cooled. The flags folded themselves quietly in attic trunks. You sit beneath a low oak, one likely older than all the blood it once watched spill. You imagine a gathering here, two brothers, maybe, or cousins from opposite sides of a ravine. Their fathers told them who they hated. They met on a foggy ridge, blades in hand, hearts pounding not with anger, but with inheritance. Perhaps they paused. Perhaps one of them asked, "Do you even remember why?" Maybe they fought anyway. Maybe they didn't. Either way, the hill grew quiet again, and the wind carried it all away. You run your hand across the bark of the tree. It's rough, steady, rooted, like the land itself, which never chose sides. The earth here never belonged to any clan. It just held them for a while, then let them go. Further up the path, a pile of stones sits beside a hollow where a house might have stood. You walk to it slowly. There's no roof, no hearth, just a few green shoots growing between stones, the kind that only take root in stillness. You don't need to know which clan lived here. You don't need to remember their colors or their alliances. What matters is this: they are part of the hill now, the name folded into soil, the struggle dissolved into moss and songbirds. You lie back in the grass. The air is cool, full of clouds that move like slow thoughts across the sky. You feel no need to get up. The world is still turning, but this hill has stopped spinning. Long ago, it stopped choosing sides. Let the names rest. Let the walls forget what they were built to divide. Let the land keep only the softness of footsteps. You do not need to carry the past tonight. You are already part of something older than any name. Sleep now, where the grass has outlasted the feud. Sleep where the wind knows all the stories and tells none of them aloud. Sleep in the hush of hills that remember peace more clearly than war. Asterisk, it begins with a map, or what's left of one, a series of faint black dots on a yellowed scroll, stretching from one sea to another. Each dot once marked a fort, a keep, a bastion of power standing watch over a road, a ridge, a river bend. They were lined like stitches, threading the empires. Pulse across continents. They watched the horizon. They waited for war, and now they wait for nothing. You walk along one of the old caravan routes, once protected by this silent network of forts. The stones beneath your feet are smooth and sun-warmed. On either side of the path, tall grasses bend under the wind, like they're bowing, not to you, but to something that passed through long before you arrived. In the distance, one of the forts rises from the plain. It's squat, square, and symmetrical, built for function, not beauty. But even now, with its roof half gone and the flagpoles empty, it holds a kind of grace, a monument to planning, a memory of readiness. This is one of many, part of an old imperial dream that believed permanence could be built in stone. Fort by fort, the empire laid down its claim. Some say it was Rome, some say Persia, some say a forgotten belt of Central Asian rulers whose names slipped from the tongue faster than their walls fell. No matter, the pattern was the same. When threats grew, the forts multiplied. When fear rose, so did towers. The empire measured its strength in stone watchpoints. On hills, gates across valleys, bastions near bridges. For centuries, it worked, or seemed to. You climbed the worn steps of the nearest one. The doorframe is gone, but the threshold remains, smoothed by the souls of soldiers, merchants, scribes. Inside rooms open to the sky. Swallows nest in the corners. Grass grows between tiles. The old fire pit is a quiet bowl of ash and seeds. In one room, a faded mural flickers with traces of red and gold. A rider on horseback, a sun disk, a tower. Perhaps it was once meant to inspire loyalty, or fear, or pride. Now it just listens. You sit in the courtyard, where voices once echoed off stone and steel. Here, messengers arrived at midnight. Here, orders were read aloud. Here, plans were made in case of siege. Now, only the wind whispers, a sound that doesn't ask for interpretation. What happened? Some say the enemies simply stopped coming. Others believe the empire spread itself too thin. Forts without supplies, soldiers without reasons. Maybe trade routes shifted. Maybe the empire no longer believed in its own shape. One day there were orders. The next, silence, and silence stayed. You imagine the last guard posting his final watch, hearing no call, seeing no torchlight. Just emptiness on the edge of the walls. Maybe he sat for a while after his shift ended, unsure if it really had. Maybe he left his armor leaning against the wall and walked off the map. Now, the fort is no longer a fort. It's a frame for the sky, a perch for birds, a place to sit when your legs grow tired of wandering. You lie down in the grass where soldiers once trained. It's uneven, soft, warm. The wall above you leans but does not fall. The sky is the same sky they once looked to, asking if the next threat had arrived. But it hasn't, not for a very long time. Let the walls stand, even without orders. Let the towers lean without shame. Let the empire forget its borders and remember how to rest. You do not need a fortress tonight. You are already safe inside the silence that was once guarded. Sleep now, where stone watches nothing but the stars. Sleep where the blueprints dissolved into birdsong. Sleep in the shelter of 1,000 forts that now protect only peace. The sea surrounds you, not in a way that feels threatening, but in a way that reminds you how small and patient a place can be. The waves move slow and circular, as if tracing old patterns. You stand at the edge of a cliff, salt thick in the air, and below, the harbor stretches out like an open palm. Empty docks, silent towers, cannons pointed toward nothing but horizon. This was once a kingdom braced for war. Not because war had arrived, but because it had been promised, threatened, forecasted. There were whispers of armadas and fleets, warlords and empires, and for generations the people believed the ocean would one day deliver them. So they waited. You walk along the old coastal road, once lined with torches, now scattered with wind-blown flowers. The stone beneath your feet still holds the grooves of heavy carts, moving cannonballs and iron spikes to the forts above. You pass a watchtower, short, weathered, leaning just slightly inland. It still stands, because nothing ever asked it not to. The island is called many names. Some believe it's in the Aegean. Others say it's a remnant of a minor Celtic lordship off the western coast. Others don't remember at all. But the shape of the story is always the same. A small kingdom on the sea, a long warning and a war that never came. You pass a field that once housed a training yard. The outline of the sparring ring is still there. Low stones, a circle, now filled with grass and scattered feathers. A sword, rusted and snapped in half, leans against a tree. The tree is winning. Further up the hill sits the king's redoubt, a small fortress built on the highest point, with views that stretch beyond what the eye can truly grasp. From here, you see the curve of the island, the wave lines spiraling outward, and the places where the war was supposed to begin, the beaches where foreign sails would land, the cliffs where archers would loose their arrows, the coves where fires would rage. It never happened, but they waited all the same. They trained, they hoarded grain, they drafted maps, sharpened pikes, built walls. The children grew into soldiers, the soldiers into old men, the old men into stories. Still, they waited. One generation told the next to be ready. One king passed on his crown with a solemn warning, they will come in your time. But time moved without invasion, and eventually it became harder to believe the war would ever arrive. The torches were no longer lit, the messengers rode less often, and the forts, so perfectly built, so carefully positioned, began to crumble, one forgotten stone at a time. You sit now within the redoubt, in a small corner room once used by signalmen. A window opens to the sea. Wind hums through the broken panes like a voice with no words. On the table beside you lies a ledger, Its ink nearly vanished, but its purpose clear. Ship sightings, page after page of empty lines. Days when nothing came. What must it have felt like to prepare so fully for something that never happened? To live under the weight of a future that refused to arrive. Perhaps it brought a strange kind of peace. Or perhaps it left a tension in the bones that never quite went away. Either way, the kingdom didn't fall. It just let go. Slowly, gently, like hands releasing a burden they'd carried too long. Now, the cliffs are home to seabirds. The towers echo with wind instead of orders. The shoreline shifts, a little each year, wearing away the edges of old anticipation. You lie back on a stone, bench worn smooth by forgotten centuries. The air is crisp. The ocean is endless. No sails, no flames, just water and wind and the distant call of gulls. Let the signal fires stay unlit. Let the cannons rust without regret. Let the sea forget the names of enemies who never came. You do not need to prepare tonight. You are already on an island where waiting turned into rest. Sleep now, where cliffs once scanned the waves. Sleep where the horizon promised nothing and delivered calm. Sleep in the silence of a kingdom that finally stopped bracing for a battle that never began. Asterisk, the trees are older than memory. Their trunks twist slowly upward, knotted with time, as if they grew in response to whispered stories. You walk beneath a high canopy that filters the light into quiet green. The air is soft with scent, moss, pine, damp leaves, and the forest hums with birds you cannot name. Somewhere a stream murmurs, and beneath your feet a path, faint, almost unwilling to be found, still knows the direction it used. To matter, you are deep within the verdant reach. Or so it was once called, a thick and tangled woodland that marked the boundary between at least 3 ancient realms. Not kingdoms in the usual sense, but tribal federations, woodland courts, crowned groves. Each claimed the trees. Each sent warriors into the underbrush. And for a long, long time, the forest echoed with war cries, signal horns, and the dull ring of weapons against bark and bone. The war wasn't just over land. It was over meanings, symbols carved into trees, sacred clearings, rituals and roots. Borders, here, were made of belief. And when one side crossed them, even by accident, it meant battle. But the forest was patient. Trees do not take sides. They grew above the scars and reached for the sun anyway. You walk now along what was once a patrol route. A low wall, covered in lichen, peeks out from behind a thicket. There was likely a watch station here, just a post a few stones, perhaps a horn hung by the entrance. The horn is gone, but the birds have replaced it. You pass an open glade where tents might once have stood. Now, tall ferns blanket the earth in soft waves. A red fox darts through, unbothered. The wind moves in sighs through the upper branches. Everything feels gentle, but not empty, just relieved. The warriors here from the northwoods, the southern grove, the hillshade clans, they trained from youth, memorized the terrain, learned to read the rustle of leaves and the flight of birds. They wore armor made of bark and cloth. They knew how to vanish. They also knew how to hate, not personally, but by inheritance. The feud had no beginning anyone remembered. It was the kind of war passed down in song, not decree, but eventually something shifted. Some say it was the trees. A particularly harsh winter that broke the limbs of both armies. Others say the soil grew tired, and nothing sprouted after too many camps. Or maybe a child wandered across the wrong line and was offered food instead of a blade. Maybe it was something simpler, silence falling and no one having the energy to break it. The war didn't end with treaties or kings or monuments. It ended like a forest regrowing, slow, unnoticed at first, then unstoppable. One side stopped blowing the horn, another stopped sharpening their arrows, and the third simply stayed home. No one officially gave up. They just forgot how to begin. Again now, you sit in the crook of an old cedar, its base wide enough for two people to rest comfortably. A carving remains near your shoulder, initials or a crest, or just a mark meant to say, I was here. You run your fingers over it. The bark is smoothing it out. The forest is always rewriting. Far above, a woodpecker taps a soft rhythm. A squirrel scolds. No one in particular. You lean back. You can almost hear the echoes of the horns, not as sound, but as memory held gently in the branches. Let the forest hold what the people could not. Let the horns rust in peace. Let the paths grow over, softly, leaf by leaf. You do not need to defend tonight. You are already sheltered by what once needed no defense. Sleep now where the birds sing in place of battle cries. Sleep where the roots outlasted every feud. Sleep in the stillness of a realm that returned to green. The stones rise in layers, like sediment laid by memory. Some are smooth, worn down by wind and hands and years. Others are jagged, fresh compared to the rest, replacements for replacements, built after fire, after siege, after yet another. Forgettable war. You walk along the outside of the city, where wall meets earth, and the ground tells its own story, rubble folded into soil, shards of pottery pressed like fossils into the mud, bits of ash swept beneath new foundations. This was a city that rebuilt, not once or twice, but again and again, each time with more urgency, more certainty, more elaborate defenses. And each time the reason seemed valid. A rival rising, a border shifting, a warning whispered from across the sea. And so new stones were quarried, new towers were added. The wall grew taller, thicker, more cunning in its architecture. But war is rarely polite. It doesn't wait for the mortar to dry. You reach a quiet section of wall now half swallowed by vines. A fig tree has found purchase in the cracks, its roots wrapping around centuries of caution. You place your palm on a cold stone. It could be from the second wall, or the fourth, or the seventh. Records blur, names change, but the pattern is always the same. A city frightened, a wall rising, and then peace, eventually. Not victory. Just exhaustion. The locals call it terror, though old maps label it differently, sometimes as a capital, sometimes as a fortress, sometimes just as a name under siege. For much of its life, Tira existed in a kind of rhythmic dread. It would rebuild, prepare, endure, then rebuild again. Children grew up hearing that the next storm was already forming. Elders spoke of times when the enemy climbed ladders, burned gates, poisoned wells, and yet the city survived. Each time it did, they built higher, stronger, a new outer wall, a moat, a watchtower with better sightlines, not because they needed to, but because they couldn't forget. You step through one of the oldest gates, its arch still elegant despite the time. The hinges are gone, but you can see where they once held. Inside, the city stretches out in quiet rings. Each ring represents an age, a layer of defense, a shell around a shell, like a tree trunk trying to shield its own heart. In the center lies a square, open, flat, sun-warmed. People sit here now in the evenings. Children run through the dust. Pigeons roost along the rooflines. No soldiers patrol. No lookouts call. The last wall was never finished. The stones are still stacked nearby, covered now in moss. Plans were drawn. Taxes were collected. But halfway through, something shifted. Maybe there was no threat this time. Or maybe the people just didn't believe in the threat anymore. Not enough to keep laying stone. You walk to the top of the half-built rampart, where weeds grow through the cracks. The view is soft, not a battlefield, not a border, just hills rolling off into the distance. You sit. The city hums below you, content in its stillness. The fear is gone, not defeated, just ... released. You wonder how it feels to let go of generations of tension, to live in a place where rebuilding isn't the instinct anymore, where protection is no longer confused with progress. You lie back on the sun-warmed stone. A bird flutters down beside you, perches briefly, then flies. On. The sky has room now. The walls no longer climb toward it. Let the stones stay where they are. Let the scaffolding crumble. Let the city know itself without armor. You do not need to brace yourself tonight. You are already surrounded by calm, not caution. Sleep now, where towers no longer rise out of fear. Sleep where silence replaced the signal horn. Sleep in a city that chose not to build another wall. Asterisk in the palace. Nothing crumbles, not dramatically. It holds its shape, even now. The outer gates still creak open. The marble floor still shines where the sunlight touches it just right. The banners, though faded, still hang. The rooms are still dusted, mostly. It looks like a place where power breathes. But if you listen closely, there's no breath, just echo. This was the house of Solarian, a dynasty that once ruled coast to coast, collecting titles like coins and inventing rituals just to give its people something to bow to. Their reign began with urgency. They unified fractured regions, fought back coastal invaders, calmed famines with reform. They earned their throne, but after a while, they didn't need to earn it anymore. You walk through a long corridor lined with portraits. Some faces look noble, others bored. One smiles too widely. Each canvas is paired with inscriptions in 3 languages, not for clarity, but for prestige. You can trace the shift in paint and posture, from warriors with maps to nobles with quills, from leaders with urgency to heirs with nothing pressing to do. They ruled through ritual. Each sunrise was scheduled, each dinner choreographed. Courtiers memorized 172 gestures of respect. The king's cough was logged, his dreams recorded by state poets. It was all very grand, but after a while, no one quite remembered what it was for. There were no wars left to fight, no rebellions to put down. The lands were quiet, the roads were paved. So the dynasty kept ruling, not out of necessity, but habit, like a fire kept alive because no one bothered to extinguish it. You enter a chamber once called the Room of Inquiry. It's empty now. Its scrolls have been moved to a library that no one visits. You sit on a cushion, once velvet, now thin. Across from you stands a statue of the 5th sovereign, a scholar king who once mapped the stars. His gaze points upward, forever seeking something beyond. But his successors looked inward. They built more halls, invented more ceremonies. They revised their own history until even they believed it. They convinced themselves that the lack of need was itself a sign of divine rule, that stillness was supremacy, that boredom was victory. But people quietly left. Merchants stopped paying attention. The roads became more important than the throne. Regional governors solved problems before the palace even noticed. The people still bowed out of courtesy, not conviction. And eventually, the palace stopped asking questions it didn't want answers to. You wander into the garden, where once the court philosophers debated under orange trees. The trees remain. The philosophers don't. A marble bench still bears a quote, "Rule is the mirror of heaven." A bird has nested in the O of mirror. The last ruler was never deposed. No angry mob, no blood in the square. He simply declared that the dynasty had completed its mission, that peace had been achieved. He stepped down not as a king, but as a man who believed the story had reached its final page. Most nodded politely. Then forgot now, the palace stands. Not as ruin, but as memory. It hosts weddings. It hums in the summer with tourists. But when it's quiet, like now, you can feel the echo of a kingdom that kept standing long after it had anywhere to go. You lie beneath a silk canopy in the old guest quarters, where diplomats once plotted alliances and affairs. The sheets are cool. The air smells faintly of jasmine. Somewhere in another room, a clock ticks not to signal time passing, but just because it was built to. Let the dynasty rest. Let the crown gather dust without shame. Let the story end without needing a final twist. You do not need purpose tonight. You are already inside the quiet that follows too much meaning. Sleep now, where power forgot why it stood tall. Sleep where marble pillars cast no shadows. Sleep in a dynasty that bowed itself gently into the dark. There was once a valley that knew nothing but war. It didn't ask for it. It didn't provoke it. But one day, long ago, two kingdoms decided it mattered. It had rivers, and rivers meant trade. It had soft soil, and soft soil meant food. It had people, and people meant taxes. So they marked it on their maps, each in their own color, and sent armies to claim it. Neither left. The war began with banners and trumpet calls. It was loud, glorious, well documented. Speeches were made. Declarations written in 3 languages were nailed to trees. But as months passed into years, and years turned into decades, the rhythm of battle became background noise. A new generation was born who had never known peace, only the expectation of tomorrow's skirmish. You walk now across that same valley. It's green, uneven, blooming with wildflowers. There are no more soldiers, no more borders, just the faint outline of old camps, hilltop mounds, forgotten trenches now softened into swales. There are still stones, memorials mostly, small cairns stacked by wandering hands. Some bear the names of captains no one remembers. Others hold nothing at all but moss. You pass one shaped like a wheel, meant once to symbolize progress. Now half buried under a flowering vine, though the records say the war lasted over 100 years. But most of it wasn't war in the way you imagine. Not constant, not coordinated, just ... enduring. A siege here, a raid there. Long winters when no one moved, long summers of waiting for orders that never came. The armies became something quieter, villages with swords, fields with watchmen, children raised to inherit a grudge rather than a goal. Some tried to end it. There were treaties, meetings, marriages between houses, but none of it held. Not because peace was impossible, but because no one quite knew how to live without the war. It had become the language of the land, an unspoken rhythm, a ritual, passed like a name, And then, finally, something strange happened. Nothing. One side stopped advancing. Then the other forgot to respond. A border post was left unmanned. A supply line faded into dust. No messenger came. No battle broke out. And no one really noticed, not at first. There was no grand peace, just a shrug spread across years, until both sides simply stopped pretending they were still at war. You come across a small wooden bridge crossing a shallow stream. Its planks are old, but sound. Once, this was a strategic point. Many died trying to hold it. But now it's just a way to get across the water without wet feet. You stand at its center, listening to the trickle. No ghosts here, just time and water and the quiet joy of being overlooked. Nearby stands the last outpost, or what remains of it. A stone tower, square and unremarkable. You climb the inner steps, one by one, your hand trailing along the cool wall. At the top, the view stretches far, rolling fields, hills like resting animals. No flags in sight. Inside the tower, a rusted helmet sits on a windowsill. Beneath it, scratched into the stone, a message in a forgotten dialect. Still here. You imagine the last soldier, bored, perhaps tired, waiting for an enemy that had already gone home. Maybe he kept watch out of duty. Maybe he enjoyed the view. Maybe he laid down his sword one evening and simply never picked it back up. You lie, down on a patch of grass where tents once stood. The earth is uneven from years of footsteps, but soft with age. The wind moves slowly here. It does not carry orders anymore. Let the valley keep its peace without explanation. Let the war slip out of memory like a name you no longer need. Let the shrugs be enough. You do not need a reason tonight. You are already inside a silence that needed no treaty. Sleep now where swords were once sharpened and now feed ivy. Sleep where commanders gave up giving commands. Sleep in a war that forgot what it was fighting for and left without a sound. Asterisk, the gate is still closed, tall, rust-touched, and bound with iron bands. It rests where it was last lowered, its great weight pressing into the earth, half swallowed by time. The chains that once hauled it into the sky now hang loose, swaying gently in the breeze. You stand before it, not as a soldier, not as a conqueror, but as someone curious, someone quiet, someone who arrived long after it stopped. Mati. This was Karnath Hold, a mountain fortress built to withstand anything. War, winter, betrayal, siege. It was a final resort, a place where rulers retreated when the world fell apart. Its stones are dark and heavy, fitted without mortar, every block chiseled by hands that knew panic. The walls rise straight into the rock behind them, merging with the cliffs, a man-made shadow wrapped around a hidden fear. You follow the old supply path, climbing beside a dried-up aqueduct. Trees now grow where wagons once creaked. Small birds dart between the ruts. The climb is steep, but the view unfolds. Beneath you like a crumpled scroll, valleys, fields, winding roads that haven't seen boots in years. Somewhere down there, help was supposed to come, but it never did. Inside the walls, you find stillness. The outer courtyard is empty. The barrels long dry, the smithy silent. A hammer still lies where someone dropped it, the handle half decayed. There's no sign of struggle, no broken doors, no scorch marks. Everything here was built to last, and it did. It simply outlasted its reason for being. You wander through narrow halls lit by shafts of soft afternoon light. A tapestry flutters in a breeze that enters through a crack in the stone. It bears a crest no one recognizes now, a wolf surrounded by 7 stars, a symbol of strength, of loyalty, of desperate hope. The fortress sealed its gates at the start of what was believed to be a brief war. The capital was under threat, the court evacuated, soldiers took position, messages were sent, scouts dispatched, torches lit on the high towers. They had food for a year, ammunition for longer, plans for every contingency except time. Time did what no army could. It wore down memory. Don't no enemy ever came. The threat passed or shifted or faded. Down in the valleys, alliances shifted. Empires broke apart. Peace treaties were signed by people who forgot about the ones up here. And those inside Karnath waited. 1 year turned into 2, then 5, then a generation. You find the old mess hall, its long tables cracked, but still upright. Plates remain, some with etched names, others with crumbs fossilized into stone. A journal lies near the end of one table, its ink faint, the final entry a single line. Still watching the road, clear skies. What kept them here? Was it loyalty? Fear, belief in an order that no longer issued orders? Or perhaps, by the time it was safe to leave, no one remembered how. You climb to the top of the main tower. It takes time. The spiral stair has crumbled in places, but enough of it holds. At the top, the air is thin, the view infinite. The signal brazier is there, cold and cracked. A few coals remain, untouched for decades. You run your hand through them. Nothing but dust and silence. But it is not sad here, just still. The fortress does not mourn, it endures. You lie down in a narrow lookout alcove, the wind curling in like an old friend. The stone is cool, but the sun has warmed one corner just enough. Above you, the sky turns gold. The gate remains sealed, not because it must be, but because it no longer knows how to open. Let the walls stand, not in fear, but in peace. Let the watch end without alarm. Let the fortress sleep. You do not need to be rescued tonight. You are already inside the shelter built for forever. Sleep now, where the guards stopped checking the horizon. Sleep where the silence became the only garrison. Sleep in the hold that was never breached, only forgotten gently by time. There's a road beneath you, but it isn't marked. No signs, no stones, no names carved into wood. Just a soft path, barely pressed into the earth, like a memory someone tried not to write down. It curves with the land, rising and falling like a breath, and the grass on either side grows without concern. You walk gently, not because the way is dangerous, but because the silence deserves your care. This is the land once ruled by the kingdom of Aram, a people defined not by what they held, but by how far they wandered. Once they had maps, long scrolls filled with rivers and ridgelines, written in a looping, lyrical script. They charted every step, they recorded every border, and they fought for those lines, just like the others. They weren't always like this. At first, they were precise, devoted to geography. They believed the land could be mastered through measurement. They sent scouts into the far deserts. They carved boundary stones on high cliffs. They named everything twice, sometimes just. To be sure, every inch of dirt had a designation, and then one spring. After a long and pointless war over a hill that only goats seemed to care for, something changed. A new ruler came to power, not a king, not exactly, but a voice who rose from among them. a woman named Arisa, who had walked more miles than she ruled. She stood before her court, unrolled the newest map, freshly drawn, lavishly painted, and lit a flame beneath it. It caught quickly. She burned every map the kingdom had. And when the flames died, she turned to the stunned crowd and said only, "We don't need them anymore. The wind knows the way." That was the beginning of the uncharting dot. No more borders, no more arguments about rivers, no more squabbles over ancient lines that had shifted with each season. They pulled down the old milestone towers. They stopped issuing travel permits. They stopped calling their settlements by anything permanent. If a village moved with the herds, so be it. If a forest claimed an old road, they took a different one. You walk now through what might once have been a city. There are no walls, no stone foundations, just traces, mossy outlines of where longhouses stood, old cooking stones, blackened but not broken. Everything made of earth returned to it. They didn't vanish. They simply let go of staying still. You find a circle of stones near a hilltop. In the center is a pole, smooth, undecorated, tall enough to catch the breeze. On it hangs a single chime, carved from driftwood. It turns slowly. Its sound is light. It's not here to guide you, only to remind you, this is a place people once passed through, and they left peace behind. Arisa ruled for 30 seasons. She never wore a crown. She walked with her people. She taught them how to listen, not to rulers, but to the wind, to the weather, to the way the geese moved across the sky. She died in a grove beside a river that had changed its course 5 times during her lifetime. They buried her without a marker. Her followers said she wouldn't have wanted one. You lie. In that grove now, or one like it, the leaves above you move in patterns no cartographer would understand. The stars are beginning to blink into view, not in rows, but in rhythm. The wind brushes your cheek. It does not instruct, it invites. Let the borders fade. Let the old paths rest. Let the wind carry the kingdom to wherever it chooses. You do not need direction tonight. You are already on the path that changes with each breath. Sleep now, where the maps are ash and the way is soft. Sleep where no one asks for coordinates. Sleep in the kingdom that walked away from certainty and found stillness. Asterisk, it began with oaths spoken at dawns and under banners, pledged in ink and blood. 7 kingdoms, or maybe 9, depending on whose account you read, joined hands, not for land or gold, but for an ideal, a shared flame, they called it, lit from the embers of old betrayals, fed by a promise that this time would be different. They would fight not for themselves, but for something larger, something lasting. You walk now through a field where the last banner once stood. There's no pole anymore, just tall grass, swaying gently under a sky drained of urgency. If you squint, you can almost see the shapes, tents, horses, the outline of an army waiting for orders that never arrived. This was the center of the alliance of the first morning, a name chosen to remind them they were starting something new. At the time, it must have sounded bold, hopeful, a little poetic. Each kingdom brought something to the table: ships, riders, archers, coin. They forged a plan that stretched across decades. They marched under one symbol, a ring of interwoven stars, and they believed it would hold them together. And for a time, it did. You follow a dirt path now that once connected the 3 eastern capitals. It's overgrown, but it still hums with direction. You can almost feel the hoofbeats. There's a bridge ahead, made of stone and time, It hasn't been maintained, but the arch still holds. The mortar was mixed with ash from the first victory, a symbolic touch. Back when symbols mattered, but somewhere between the third winter campaign and the seventh change of leadership, the ideals began to blur. Some say it was politics, others say exhaustion, or maybe the alliance grew too large, too slow, like a great wheel that forgot where it began turning. The cause was still spoken of, but now in ceremonies, not in action. The original threat changed, then changed again. New enemies appeared. New priorities rose. The flame that once burned bright flickered in too many directions. They kept fighting, but no one was sure why. The soldiers obeyed because the rhythm was familiar. The flags still flew. The reports were still written, but behind closed doors, the generals questioned the goal. Behind stone walls, kings whispered, "Are we still on the same side?" Eventually, one by one, the kingdoms drifted, not in revolt, but in quiet redirection. A treaty signed here, a border loosened there, a trade route reopened. Some sent word to the others, some didn't bother. The Great Alliance never fell apart with a bang, it just quietly unspode. You arrive now at what was once the Grand Assembly Hall. Nature has begun the gentle task of taking it back. Ivy curls along the colonnades. The floor is cracked, but still patterned with colored stone, a mosaic of clasped hands, each one different, meant to symbolize unity. You kneel beside one, the tile has chipped, but the gesture remains. No one tore it up, it just stopped being necessary. You sit on the steps that once held boots and sandals and spurs from every region. You close your eyes and imagine the sounds. Heated voices, the clash of argument and ambition, and beneath it all, a question they forgot to ask until too late. What happens when the cause is gone, but the machine still moves? You lie on your back in the main hall, staring at a ceiling once painted with constellations. The stars have faded, but the structure holds, like a body remembering how to breathe even after waking from a long dream. Let the alliance dissolve, not in anger, but in peace. Let the stars find new constellations. Let the joined hands part gently. You do not need a cause tonight. You are already inside the quiet that comes when duty releases its grip. Sleep now, where banners were once stitched with hope. Sleep where footsteps once echoed in purpose. Sleep in an alliance that gave its all, then gave itself a rest. You step onto a road that doesn't remember where it leads. It's wide, still, paved in stone, finely laid. You can feel the ambition in the straightness of it, in the way it cuts across valleys and ignores hills. This road once belonged to an empire so vast that no map could capture it, and so certain of itself that it never thought to look behind. They called it Eloria, though no one says that name anymore unless they're reading it off a chipped column or a bronze seal buried in the dirt. At its height, it stretched from sea to ice, from salt to jungle, and it kept stretching, not because it needed more, but because it had forgotten how to stop. The first city, the place where it all began, was built beside a bend in a river, humble and hopeful. It had a market square and a watchtower. It had stories, but over centuries of campaigns and absorbed cultures, even the emperors forgot which bend, which river. There were too many rivers now, too many markets, too many watchtowers repeating the same mistakes with better uniforms. You walk beside milestones, most too worn to read. They don't help anyway. Each one points toward a place that no longer answers to its old name. You reach a fork in the road where a tall, weathered monument stands. Once it marked a boundary. Now ivy pulls at its edges, and the eagle engraved at the top has lost its beak. The empire was hungry. It devoured other lands, and, with them, other calendars, other gods, other ways to count time and value silence. It prided itself on assimilation, the way it could absorb and rename anything, paint it in its own shade. But in doing so, it diluted its own roots. Its own shade grew pale. Every new province needed governors, roads, laws, ceremonies. Soon, half the empire was writing scrolls, the other half no longer read, and the rulers, born in distant cities, ruled lands they'd never seen. They issued decrees that meant little to the people whose homes were paved for glory. You find one such city now, or what's left of it, built in the southern style, though no one remembers what south used to mean. Pillars lean at angles not meant by design. A dried-up fountain sits in the plaza. The inscription on its base reads, "Victory is our compass." You sit on the rim, legs dangling into the empty bowl. There were uprisings, of course, and fatigue, and 1,000 names etched into the empire's memory like bruises it tried not to press. But the collapse didn't come from fire or sword. It came from forgetting, from growing too far outward to keep the center whole. No one knew which city to protect first, which road to repair, which law still mattered. They began to turn inward, each province asking itself what it had to do with a name carved on coins from far away. And so the edges frayed. Quietly, a bridge went unrepaired. A festival skipped. An army went home and didn't come back. By the time someone looked for the capital, it wasn't clear where to start. The heart of the empire had become everywhere, and so it beat nowhere. You wander into an archive built into a hillside. Its door is gone, but inside, shelves still stand. Dust softens the air. Scrolls lie open to plans and treaties and dreams too dense to matter now. One reads simply, District X requests a summary of District Y's summary of District Z's grievance. A record of nothing, folded like a flower, pressed for no one. You lie down on the floor of the scribe's hall. The stones are cool. Light filters in through a broken panel in the ceiling, slicing across the floor like a blade dulled by too many uses. The walls are thick, the kind made for permanence. But even permanence needs a reason. Let the empire rest. Let the roads fade into the grasses. Let the names soften in the mouths of those who no longer need them. You do not need dominion tonight. You are already surrounded by silence that no longer salutes. Sleep now, where conquests once marched, and now the wind walks. Sleep where maps blur, not from weather, but from memory. Sleep in the empire that grew past itself and found no beginning. Left to return to. Asterisk, you stand on a line that doesn't know it's a line. There is no sign here, no checkpoint, no marker scratched into stone. Just a field, soft and wide, where the grass grows in different directions depending on the breeze. Not the flags. Somewhere beneath your feet, old maps disagree. One calls this place the edge of the Northern Territory. Another swears it was once part of a southern empire. A third, more recent, simply says contested. And so it has been, passed back and forth like a story retold in different tongues, until the beginning no longer matters. The people who lived here through it all, they stopped choosing sides, not out of fear, out of sleepiness. There were only so many times they could repaint the gate or learn a new anthem before they realized it was all temporary. The The soldiers came and went. The banners faded in the rain. The taxes changed names, but the amounts stayed the same. At some point, the locals began calling this place the middle, not between nations, between decisions. You follow a narrow footpath, worn by carts that once delivered grain, then salt, then nothing at all. A fence leans half-finished across the trail, stopped mid-build when the builders were recalled, reassigned, or simply gave up. One side of the path is overgrown with purple weeds, the other has wild onions sprouting in clumps. You hear laughter in the distance. Children playing a game that doesn't require borders. Their rules make more sense than treaties. They are immediate, local, fair. Whoever wins does not redraw maps. They just smile and run again. There are stones in the earth here, old ones, shaped by careful hands. You find one that has been chiseled and rechiseled, each language erasing the one before it. What remains is unreadable, smoothed into gibberish by centuries of contradiction. A farmer passes with a mule. You nod. He nods. No one asks which country he belongs to. He belongs to soil. He belongs to seasons. That is enough. The town nearby, it had many names, once. But now the people just call it here, not to be poetic, but to be precise. It's always here, even when the borders drift. That way, they never have to change their signs. You sit at a fountain in the center of here. Its basin is cracked, but still collects rain. The carvings along the edge mix styles. One side shows horses with squared shoulders. The other, birds with long tails. A compromise of empires that no longer supervise the stone. You rest your hand on the wet marble dot here, life. Learned to live without resolution. Here, peace didn't come from treaty, but from disinterest. No side won, no line held. The arguments just dissolved into chores, the chants into yawns. This was a war not ended, but forgotten, and forgotten things, like ancient ruins or unfinished songs, are allowed to fall asleep. You wander into a library that used to hold records of ownership, disputes, transfers. The scrolls have gone soft with age. A book lies open on a desk with a list of past governors, each one scratched out and rewritten so many times the paper tore. On the last page, someone wrote, "Let whoever wants it have it. We are tired." You trace those words with your finger, slowly. Outside, a flagpole leans, rusting. No flag flies from it anymore. The last one tore in a storm, and no one bothered to replace it. The sky didn't seem to mind. Now the stars belong to no one. You lie down on the edge of the old embankment that was once a fort. Grass has overtaken the stones. The earth forgives intrusion faster than history. You stare upward. The sky is not partitioned. The clouds move borderless. The wind has no paperwork, and you, breathing gently on the ground, are not required to take sides, sleep now, on this land that changed names until it no longer listened. Sleep in the soft center of nowhere, urgent. Sleep where the lines faded and only the people remained. Sleep where even the war gave up, quietly, without a parade. Asterisk, now the maps are folded. Now the soldiers sleep too. The flags are gone, the arguments dissolved, and nothing asks you to choose a side anymore. You rest in a place that stopped needing a name. A place where even the wind does not declare allegiance. A borderland that never really belonged to anyone, except to dreams. Let the quiet claim you now. Let the grass grow back over the lines, and sleep, undisturbed, in the center of nowhere. In particular, Good night, gentle soul, and welcome home. To hear